Hi, my name is Alexis Atwood, and my summer research was on vulnerability, poetry of witness, and human rights. The central aim of my research was to understand how vulnerability is depicted in poetry and the pedagogical use of close reading poetry to advance vulnerability studies. My work began by synthesizing existing scholarship on vulnerability studies and worked to resolve any theoretical contradictions about what vulnerability is. I went on to further define the different types of vulnerability as understood by modern scholars and then outlined my methodological approach for the remainder of my research. The different kinds of vulnerability explored in my work, explained by Dr. Daniel Petherbridge, are corporal vulnerability, which includes both the propensity for bodily suffering and the possibility for sensuality and things like care. Social vulnerability, which relates to a sense of individualism, which makes the individual vulnerable to social rejection or acceptance. And political vulnerability, which on the one hand makes interdependence possible, but also exposes individuals to forms of power that make individuals vulnerable to political violence. I close read El Salvadorian poetry to understand how these different kinds of vulnerability manifest in poems and considered the corporal, social, and political factors that allow for different kinds of vulnerability to occur and what measures could or do prevent these kinds of vulnerabilities from occurring. While my work surveyed all three types of vulnerability outlined early in my research, the corporal, the social, and the political, it focused particularly on corporal vulnerability and emphasized the value of evaluating poetry of witness through the lens of theories on corporal vulnerability. Now, poetry of witness is a genre of poetry that documents individual experiences of extremity, like exile, war, and genocide. And my research focused on the ways experiences of bodily harm manifested in my selected poems. I concluded my research by arguing that joining vulnerability studies and the study of poetry of witness and reading poetry through this theoretical lens in the classroom can become a tool for human rights education, justice, and advocacy. Thank you.
And you've got 30 seconds to spare. Fantastic, fantastic. Questions for Alexis? Well, given that your argument that close reading can be a tool for human rights education and advocacy, how do you envision this approach being used in real-world classrooms or communities? And what do you think poetry can reveal about human vulnerability that more traditional human rights discourse might overlook?
So on the one hand, it does require the theoretical approach, so you have to be reading poetry in conjunction with reading the theory from my perspective, but it does also include other theories. So there are care ethics, there are other aspects of vulnerability studies that I think have to be understood for students to be able to engage with poetry in that way. But because poetry is such an emotional genre, I think that that's why it's valuable for vulnerability studies to kind of bridge the emotional gaps between different communities.
Excellent, excellent. Yes.
Are there, is my own mic on, would you recommend any poets specifically that you feel are particularly adept at communicating the vulnerability of the human experience?
Of course. So Claribel Allegra, she's from El Salvador. She documents a lot of her experiences in the early 20th century in El Salvador, especially around the time of the El Salvadorian Civil War. Pablo Neruda is also wonderful. He's also very political, so he talks about vulnerability, but also the political aspects of vulnerability, which are great to understand, and Roque Dalton as well.
Thank you.
Let's thank Alexis for that great presentation.